watch this vidcast, or I'll gouge your eyes out.
Welcome back, Horror Hounds, to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I'm Mike Ghostman Pickle.
And I'm James Rivera. We have a couple of slasher gems and a documentary about cult films to discuss, but before we get to that, we have to get to...
Horror Show news.
Spooky special Joe Bob's Halloween Hideaway coming to Shudder on October 23rd.
Also coming to Shudder is the Creepshow animated special on October 26th.
Ooh. Stranger Things Season 4 production update. It looks like they're going to resume September 28th.
And Adam Egypt Mortimer, the director of Daniel Isn't Real, his movie Arch Enemy gets a theatrical and digital release date in December.
So it's going to be released in theaters like right now? Like in December? Like this December?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So the first thing we got is the Joe Bob Briggs Halloween Hideaway special coming to Shudder on October 23rd. They announced the title of the last drive-in special today, revealing that Joe Bob's Halloween Hideaway will stream Friday, October 23rd at 9 a.m. It says, horror movie host and drive-in movie expert Joe Bob has left the trailer park behind in favor of a more remote retreat, but he's still ready to serve up a double feature of films handpicked for your Halloween enjoyment. That's what Shudder's press release says. The Halloween special premieres live on Shudder TV feed. So if you want to watch it live, Shudder TV feed, not on the Shudder website. It'll come out there like a few days after, then you'll be able to stream it at your will. And it's going to be made available on Monday, so you only have to wait 3 days if you miss it. Also going to be available in Shudder Canada. Shudder's other Halloween, Shudder will be having multiple Halloween specials this year, with Joe Bob being their crowning achievement, their big draw.
I was hoping they'd give some hints or something to say what these movies are going to be, but they didn't give us anything yet.
I think they've gotten used to not giving hints. I think they like surprising the audience, because the Joe Bob Briggs audience is going to show up no matter what movies he's going to show. They show up for him. They trust his insight and his opinions. And they trust that even if they don't enjoy the movie, he's going to make them enjoy it with his commentary, his information, his factoids, his general knowledge. What's really interesting about this, they said this is not going to be the usual setting, so we're not going to see him at a drive-in. They call it the Halloween Hideaway. So I wonder what that means. Are they going to be like a haunted house, or what do you think we could speculate? Where is Joe Bob going to be this time?
Well, if they're saying remote retreat, I'm thinking like a quarantine version of Joe Bob, because that one that he done with Adam Green, that was recorded back before the whole lockdown happened.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as I know, they didn't have anything else recorded. So I'm thinking this might be some type of thing in quarantine, or he's in lockdown on a remote telecast or something like that.
If I had to venture to guess, it's a possibility. I haven't checked, but it would be interesting if this time he showed Halloween 2, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, and maybe Halloween 6, because for his Halloween Hootenanny, he did Halloween, Halloween 4, and Halloween 5. So it'd be interesting to if he could fill out the gaps of the franchise. But something tells me it's going to be something entirely different.
Yeah, it'll probably still be Halloween themed, though. He might do some other films with Halloween in them.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see.
But we'll see. I would like to see him do a Halloween 3, though.
Yep, but
that'd be awesome.
Darcy would have to host half of it.
Yeah, she loves that one.
Yep.
The next one I'm excited about, the Creepshow animated special, is coming to Shudder on October 26th. Greg Nicotero is still working on season 2 of Creepshow, but they created this fully animated special just for Halloween, featuring 2 stories. One of them is Survivor Type, based on the short story by Stephen King and adapted by Greg Nicotero. It stars Kiefer Sutherland as a man determined to stay alive alone on a deserted island, no matter what the cost. And the second story is going to be Twittering from the Circus of the Dead, based on the short story by Joe Hill and adapted by Melanie Dale. It stars Joey King from The Kissing Booth and The Act as a teen whose family road trip includes a visit to the gravest show on earth. Again, this comes out October 26th. This is going to be really cool.
So the first story is a Stephen King one, and you said it's on an island?
Yeah.
This is my guess. Remember, we went to the Shudder panel. What event was it that we went to the Shudder panel?
Oh, wasn't it Midsummer Scream, right?
Yeah. All right. Midsummer Scream. We went to a panel for Creepshow before the show had been released, and I remember Greg Nicotero was talking about when he spoke to Stephen King. Stephen King sent them a story about that would take place on an island, but he told them that it was too expensive. It's not within their budget to do that, so he had to request another story from Stephen King. Is this that story? Since the budget would be too big, animation would be perfect, so they could still pull it off. So I'm thinking this is that story.
I'm thinking that might be what gave him the idea to make it animated.
Hold on a second. I'm sorry, say that again.
I'm thinking that's what might be gave him the idea to make it animated.
Yeah.
Since they got that story that was too high of a budget to try to pull off, so they should do it animated. And they're like, hey, this is something to tide people over to season 2. Give them a little animated special, and the animation on there is really cool as it is. So I'm hoping they'll take that same animation.
I mean, it's already a perfect fit because the idea of Creepshow anyway is supposed to be like a comic book anthology. It's supposed to be like the classic, like from the Vault of Horror or Tales from the Crypt, all those classic EC comics. So I think it's kind of like a perfect match to do it animated. In fact, it's kind of surprising that they've never tried a full-on animated one before. But I think that this is a perfect format. And if it's good, if it turns out well, maybe we'll see more animated Creepshow specials in the future.
Yeah, and Creepshow is becoming a pretty big hit for Shudder. So between Creepshow and Joe Bob, Shudder's really tearing up the horror scene this year.
They are. Yes, they are. Much love. So in other news, Stranger Things Season 4 production update. So right now, Netflix is targeting a September 28th start date. It's been about 6 months since the ongoing pandemic forced Netflix to suspend production on the 4th season of Stranger Things. They're targeting a release. They're targeting to get back on September 28th, and they want to release it in 2021. They're not committing to a date right now, mainly because just because they're going to be filming again on September 28th does not mean that they're going to be able to go through the whole way. As we heard with Robert Pattinson on the Batman, where they had to suspend production when it was revealed that Robert Pattinson had caught COVID, and then they stalled it, and he had to quarantine, and they started back up. So with the situation right now, I feel it's like really unpredictable. So it makes sense that they're not going to be committing to any date because just there's no guarantee that the shoot is going to go all the way through to the end. The only thing that concerns me, these kids are in their puberty and they're growing fast. They're at the age where you could look different from 1 month to the next. In 2 months. In the 6 months, they're growing up very, very fast. That's the only thing that worries me about them shooting in this style. It's not their fault, though. This is something that's completely beyond their control, so that's not really a complaint. It's just more of a minor concern of mine that they might look inconsistent in age throughout this season, since it's being shot over long periods of time, since it was started at the beginning of the year. Now it's almost towards the end of the year, and if they stop again, you know what I mean.
Yeah, they're at that age where kids have growth spurts.
Mm-hmm. So they could look different. They could look completely different from 6 months ago. That's the only thing that I could see being in. And as it is, the seasons don't take place that far apart. But you could notice each season the cast getting noticeably older. You watch them growing up in front of your eyes. I don't think people want to see that happen within one season, though.
Yeah. You think it might go far enough to where they have to alter the story a little bit and have a little bit more time passed?
They might have to do something depending on what the kids look like, but that's only speculation right now. So fingers crossed that it comes out good, though. I'm looking forward to it. And it looks like this is probably the last season of Stranger Things. And this is what they said. Season 4 is shaping up to be the biggest and most frightening season yet, and we cannot wait for everyone to see more. In the meantime, pray for the American. Wonder what that means.
Hopper.
Oh, yeah, that's right, Hopper. So I'm guessing he's coming back. I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody knows that Hopper's going to be returning. I did think we'd all be more shocked if he didn't return.
Yeah.
Kind of expected.
I mean, I'm used to cliffhangers like this. I grew up, ever since the 70s, I remember all these big cliffhangers. So This is just like any one of those cliffhangers. If you look, and if a big character is going to die, you actually have to see them die before you're sure that they're dead.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so they gave too many hints at the end of the season where everybody was all tore up that Hopper was dead, and I'm like, what? Of course he's not dead. They even give you hints at the end, and they didn't show him die, so he's going to come back.
Definitely coming back.
And they have to have ideal conditions to film this last Stranger Things, because not only is it the final season, it's a series that gets bigger and bigger with each season. So this has to be, so if they have to try to top themselves with each season, that last season was a huge grand scale, dude.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to have to really have ideal conditions to get this right.
Which is probably the reason why this is going to be ending after season 4. You can only go so big.
Yeah.
Start to become absurd. I think it becomes harder for filmmakers to top because you have to keep upping the budget every time. So here's hoping that Stranger Things goes out with a bang.
Yeah, I kind of get nervous when a show gets bigger from season to season like that. I think they have to fizzle out.
Yeah.
Because they can't keep getting any bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So if you listen to the podcast, you know that we're both big fans of Adam Egypt Mortimer after seeing Daniel Isn't Real last year. Well, his movie Arch Enemy gets a theatrical and digital release date in December. So RLJE Films teamed with Elijah Wood's Spectrovision to produce the story of Max Fist, played by Joe Manganiello from True Blood, who claims to be a hero from another dimension who fell through time and space to Earth, where he has no powers. No one believes his stories except for a local teen named Hamster. Together, they take to the streets to wipe out the local drug syndicate and its vicious crime boss known as the Manager. It will premiere at Beyond Fest and then will hit theaters and on demand December 11th.
Based on that description, it sounds like they picked the right actor for the role because it seems like he's going to be taking on a vaguely superhero-ish role. And I know he's already signed on to be in the Batman movie Deathstroke. I don't know if that's still happening. I don't think it actually is. But he has the look, and he's like a superhero type. So it makes sense that he would be like a hero that fell from Earth. So this is going to be like, I'm guessing horror with like some superhero-infused influences in it. I mean, which is only natural given the culture that we're living in.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like the Superman story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where he's like a godlike being who comes to Earth, except this hero has no powers here, but Superman, this is the only place he has powers, so it's kind of reverse Superman story.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost sounds a little bit exploitation, like in the grandiose type of story, and then only one kid believes him.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of goes on this crusade with him to stop all the drug dealers, and the main crime boss being the Manager. So it sounds very exploitative type of storyline, but I think Adam Egypt Mortimer will do good with a storyline like that.
Yeah, I'll be checking out. Probably a video on demand, unless it's released at a drive-in theater, because I doubt we're going to be in ideal conditions for movie theaters come December. Just my take. I don't.
But it's going to premiere at Beyond Fest, which we're lucky enough to be close to where they're playing Beyond Fest, and they're continuing it because they did a little drive-in run where they were playing old classics like The Lost Boys and Fright Night and Evil Dead and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So now they're starting the actual Beyond Fest because they were hoping to have a theater to play it in by now,
mm-hmm.
but the lockdown's still going on, so they're going to continue it in Mission Tiki Drive-In.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully we'll get to see Arch Enemy at Beyond Fest, but it sells out quick. I'm actually going to see the Possessor at Beyond Fest tonight at Tiki Drive-In, so I'm excited for that. So I'll be talking about that a little bit next week.
Perfect. Sounds interesting. So we got some interesting movies to discuss today. A couple things one movie I'm particularly excited for. The other one, I'm looking forward to talking about it, but I don't know if I'm thrilled.
Yeah, we watched a couple of slashers, both from 1981, both originally based on the same story of the Cropsy killer. The first one is The Burning from 1981, It was directed by Tony Maylam, who went on to direct Split Second with Rutger Hauer a few years later. And it's written by Bob Weinstein, with a story by Harvey Weinstein and Brad Gray. Now, Brad Gray...
Yes. That Harvey Weinstein, folks, yes.
Yes.
Who do you think it is?
That nasty, yes, that nasty pervert. And there's some moments where you can tell this is written by a nasty pervert.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Brad Gray, if you notice that name, he was one of the story collaborators on it with Harvey Weinstein. He's a producer of The Sopranos, The Departed, Scary Movie, The Wedding Singer, Cable Guy, and this movie basically launched the Weinstein's career. It was their first feature film as producers. And it's about a former summer camp caretaker who is horribly burned from a prank and returns years later with a pair of hedge clippers to get revenge on the campers. It was originally titled The Cropsy Maniac, so it's based directly off the Cropsy legend. Mm-hmm. And it stars Brian Matthews as Todd, the hunky leading man. Brian Backer from Fast Times at Ridgemont High as the little nerd Alfred. Leah Ayres as the blonde bombshell from Bloodsport. She plays Michelle. And Jason Alexander, George from Seinfeld, plays Dave. And it's also the feature film debut of both Fisher Stevens and Holly Hunter, with makeup by the great Tom Savini, who actually turned down Friday the 13th 2 to work on this. And a better decision he could not have made.
Sage choice. So let's get a couple things out of the way with this movie. There are a couple of elements on this, and this is normal for slashers, and this is going to turn some people off. This needs to be addressed before we can move forward. Yes, this is from a story by Harvey Weinstein and his brother Bob. So there's a couple of moments in there where in a normal slasher it would just seem like a typical slasher movie, especially when the guys are perving out on the girls. In this one, knowing that Harvey Weinstein had such a heavy hand in the production of it all, and knowing that he did the story and his brother worked on it, those elements become a little bit more problematic because you know what place they're coming from. However, having said that, the Weinsteins, terrible fucking people. I'm never ever going to make excuses for them. They were, especially Harvey Weinstein, they were savvy movie producers. They were very smart, they had a lot of ambition, and they knew how to sniff out a good project. And this, to me, has the Weinsteins written all over it. And I think it's really interesting that the Weinsteins were at the forefront of 2 cycles of the slasher film, which which a lot of people don't realize, is that they were in it from the early on with the Burning, and they were helping with the revival with Scream when Harvey Weinstein made the brilliant decision to pair Kevin Williamson, an up-and-coming screenwriter, with Wes Craven, an established legend. And what separates this is it has all the things that we love about slasher movies. It's trashy, it's sleazy, it has that great Tom Savini gore, that makeup is absolutely fantastic. It has all the trashy teen talk, it has everything that people like about slashers. It's that exact formula. There's nothing particularly original about this movie, but it takes that formula and I think it does it to absolute perfection. This is the ultimate version of the summer camp slasher, a bunch of kids going to summer camp and facing down a killer psycho. Because it's made by the Weinsteins, you could tell that they recognize the X factor that makes these movies, makes audiences want to go to these movies, but they also had enough ambition and forethought to try to make this an actual good movie. They put a lot of care into the script. I think that with a lot of slasher movies from this era, you sit around listening to the characters and you wait for them to get hacked up because they're usually boring, they're shrieky, they're shrill, the dialogue usually sucks. This one, the character interactions make you laugh. The dialogue is actually pretty good. The acting is actually pretty solid too, and you come to care about all of these kids. The dynamic is believable. There's something more to care about at its core. And also on top of this, I think most slashers, especially from that era, want to get to the hack and slashing right away. And this movie does have superb gore effects, courtesy of Tom Savini. But it's a slow burn slasher movie, which is really rare for that era. It's a long time. Well, actually, there's a killing early on in the movie, but there's a long time before one of the killer strikes at the camp itself was before one of the campers and it builds tension and suspense, and it teases it several times. I normally don't like that. This one, I felt like it gave me an opportunity to hang out with the characters, get to know them better, and get to know them a lot better. So I think this is a fantastic movie. What are your thoughts, Michael?
There was a level of competence and skill that was apparent from the very first frame, where even the bit players can act, and even the bit players feel like natural characters. And then I love how it opens up with this group of boys playing a prank on Cropsy, and it's excellent camera work right away. Really good effects. And then we see the full story of Cropsy with him burning and everything, and then a gruesome kill when he starts to take his revenge, and all this before the summer camp even starts. So, like many summer camp slashers, we start out in the summer camp, or like the other one we're gonna review today, where they start out they're already at the campfire telling the story about it. You know,
usually revealed through character exposition. The legend of the killer is usually, you never actually see the creation. Like, the movies are always in a rush just to get to that, and we'll just shove it in some character's mouth just so the audience will have a vague enough understanding that the story could proceed forward. This one, you could tell that they care. They're like, no, we want to establish the scenario right away. It's an interesting scenario. Like you said, it's fantastic camera work. Fantastic camera work in the dark. Anybody who's shot a movie knows how how hard it is to get clear cinematography in darkened rooms or darkened areas at night. So the camera work's already impressive on that front. And from the very beginning, the prank features, like you said earlier, really good special effects makeup, particularly the thing that they leave there to scare Cropsy, the thing that they do to horrify him.
Yeah, it's extremely well lit, where, like you say, even in the dark scenes, that everything that you want to see is illuminated, but you're still in the dark. And even some of the scenes in broad daylight are scary, and they kind of there's some unexpected scenes in here, some scares when you're expecting something else, and then they throw something else at you. And then I love how they go through the whole story of Cropsy, and then they finally get to the summer camp. And then, now this is how a summer camp typically starts, where they have the kids playing sports and the horny guys looking at the girls' asses. And then, of course, every one of them go to the food hall scene. Every one of them has a food hall scene with somebody picking on a nerd. And then they go to the swimming part. It's all the tropes are there, but just done to perfection. And who else but the Weinsteins would realize that it was a good idea to put $1.5 million into a slasher in 1981, and it was written before Friday the 13th even became a success. So how did they know to put this kind of, competent exposition, good storytelling, good camera work, and it's the great Tom Savini? Who thought to put all that into a slasher during this time?
I think that nobody would have. And I think that this movie, and again, I apologize for this, but they're a big part of film history, so it needs to be addressed whether you like it or not. The ambition of the Weinsteins was there from the beginning. It makes sense that the guys who discovered Quentin Tarantino and Kevin Smith and Robert Rodriguez, they basically the Weinsteins basically ignited the indie film movement of the 1990s. If you really think about the explosion of indie films and all these original voices that came out in the 1990s were because of the Weinsteins. You already see that Harvey Weinstein was one of those people. He was like a vulture. He got all of his movies to get nominated for Oscars and win. So you could see from the very beginning that savvy, that intuition, that intelligence. There's like, some people have a certain type of gift to know what's going to work in a film and what's not. They were brilliant producers. You know what I mean? They knew ahead of the game. Slashers were not even that big of a thing when this is so early on in the slasher phase. Like, I feel like most of the slasher phase is kind of was started by Friday the 13th. To think that this was made before Friday the 13th on a bigger budget, much more skill too. This is far superior as a film to Friday the 13th. I don't think it even comes within spitting distance of The Burning, to be very, very, very clear. it's kind of mind-blowing that they were that in tune. But it makes sense that the people who were in tune back then were the people who were in tune enough to help revive the slasher. So really, when you think about it, beyond the indie film scene, the Weinsteins were at the beginning of the slasher craze, getting in on it before it turned into a big thing. They were smart, and then they were at the forefront of reviving it and turning it into something in the 1990s. Everything about their ambition, their forethought, it all shows up in this movie. It's a movie that was very obviously made with a lot of care. You could tell the people behind it wanted this to be something special. We're not going to produce some cheap-ass slasher movie. Has all the elements of cheap slasher movies, but it looks so much better than any of the other ones. And Tom Savini, a stroke of genius, getting that man to work on the special effects. And this is probably some of the best works he's ever done in a slasher movie. Not quite the best. I think his best work in a slasher movie is probably The Prowler, but that's for another time. This comes pretty damn close. And this has one of the best kill scenes in any horror movie I could think of, because it's a jump scare that completely... You think that there's a scene where there's a fucking vicious jump scare, and I think what makes that scene effective is building up to it, you're anticipating something really awful, and you could feel it inside of you, like the tension building. And then when it finally arrives at that scene, it's actually a lot worse than your imagination thought it was going to be. You thought it was going to be something else. This is far worse. And it basically, there's this thing in slasher movies that they always do where to make you, the characters always isolate themselves stupidly, so they could like stupidly isolate themselves and they get killed. They don't stick together. There's this idea in slasher movies that there's strength in numbers. This movie totally obliterates that idea. It totally, that sense of safety that you get with, yeah, these characters I care about, they're traveling together, strength in numbers, is completely obliterated. And I think that's a stroke of genius, to delete that element from the slasher movie. The idea that just because we stick together, we're going to be safe. No, you're not. And that's another thing that I think separates this, puts this above the pack.
And I love that moment of that big massacre kill scene, because it happens a few times in the movie where it's this suspense building up to it, and this tension, and you think the whole time it's going to be a discovery of a dead body, and you're getting ready to see the gore and the person lying there dead, and then it's the killer attacking all of a sudden. And I don't see that enough in slashers.
It really plays with the audience expectations. You could tell that the filmmakers are aware of the audience reacting to the movie that they're giving in front of you. They're aware of what the audience expects. They're aware of what they're doing. And they use that awareness of audience, like intuition and participation, to flip that on you and to throw it back into your face and kind of give you a sense of, give you a sense of unpredictability. Even though this movie is, in so many ways, boilerplate. It's so standard fare when you think about the story and everything. So it's just amazing that this much level, skill, and thought could elevate a formula to kind of perfection, in my opinion. It's like one of the, I think The Burning is one of the unsung horror, one of the unsung genre gems, period, of the 1980s. When you really think about all the horror that came out in the genre films and the cult movies, I think this one has to have a certain kind of pride of place at the top of the pile as far as slasher movies go, as far as cult movies go.
And and even the best slashers have these typical stereotype type of characters where they're almost caricatures rather than characters, but this one has real characters, like Glazer. As much as I know we're supposed to hate the guy, but he's kind of a real guy. And like the scenes between him and Sally where Sally kind of likes him but she kind of pushes him away. And then the scenes between Glazer and Alfred where he's picking on him, and then Glazer and Todd where Todd picks on Glazer, and then all the different couples and things. I believed everyone. Yeah. So and there wasn't anybody making a bunch of dumb decisions or setting up the next kill. It all came. Almost every kill came unexpected. Every time you thought it was going to be something else, it ends up being a kill. There's genuine story and character moments. And then they even have a campfire story where they go on the canoe trip and then Todd's telling the story around the campfire. There's lots of nudity. and like we mentioned before,
The
a lot of a lot of guys pushing themselves on women, and it's not only that, it's guys pushing themselves on women where the women say no, but they're not sure, they kind of like the guy. So it's almost even worse that they not only show the guys pushing themselves on the women, they show the women putting up with it and kind of being titillated by it. So that was kind of weird, but not all the characters are like that. Not all the male characters were like that, and not all the female characters were bimbos, you know.
Here's another thing. This is a movie without a final girl.
Without a what?
Without a final girl. I don't think it has a final girl. Like, the way that I see this, what I thought was really interesting, and here's another thing that I think this movie does. Unlike in the next movie we're going to discuss, and it's not, the next movie, just to hint, it's going to be Madman, and there's a reason we're discussing it in context with The Burning. But pretty much most, other than maybe Sleepaway Camp is the only other one I could think of besides The Burning, all these, like, camp slasher movies, these slasher movies that take place at camps, they are about, you know, teenagers looking after kids at a summer camp. When the killer comes out on a lot of these movies, it's like the children completely disappear. Like, they're not even on the camp anymore. The killer is only going after the teenagers, and it's kind of, like, vaguely unrealistic. This one might disturb people because not all of the victims are teenagers. A couple of the victims are actually the little kids who are there to be looked at. And the movie never lets you forget that the campsite is populated with children, thus, like, kind of upping the stakes with this one, where you actually feel like everybody's in danger. And because there's so many characters in this movie, there's quite a few survivors by the end of the movie. There's actually one of the few slashers where a lot of the characters that you like and root for actually make it to the end. And I think they were able to do that by having such a wide variety of characters. And it's also a little bit more realistic that there would be, you know, more than one survivor, that there would be a handful of survivors in the scenario.
It makes you feel like you never know who's going to get killed next, too.
The
like, there's
idea of it.
But besides Todd, there's not an apparent hero or heroine in this. Like, you know that Todd's going to survive to the end, but you don't know how far he's going to get.
I forgot the other camp counselor was. I feel bad. The female one, she was smart. She took charge of the situation. The teenagers leading them were not stupid. Which is such a rare thing to actually see in a slasher movie, that they don't get killed for their stupidity. They get killed because the killer is dangerous and he outsmarts them or tricks them or kind of finds ways to lure them to something that they're not expecting. So none of the decisions in this are, like, stupid. Like, the characters don't make stupid decisions in this movie. And I think that's really special and really hard to pull off in a slasher.
Yeah, there's something definitely special about it. I mean, it keeps you riveted the entire time, whether the kills are happening on screen or not. And with Tom Savini, you know that there's a great kill going to come up, and you know, no matter how much you have to wait, there's a great kill coming up. And I noticed that Tom Savini must have a say in the camera shots on his kills, because there's a certain way, his style of makeup, which is very natural looking and very organic looking, but there's also a certain style to the camera shots that display his work. And it displays it in this bright Technicolor where you can see everything so well. And a lot of times with Tom Savini, he does those kind of effects where you think when the camera's going to cut away, it shows everything.
Well, and not Tom Savini to cut away from his effects. Yeah.
And some of these kills reminded me of, like, some Giallo kills with the bright red blood everywhere. Especially the stabbing of the hooker, that felt very Giallo to me.
It was very Giallo. And it was who else? I want to mention something. Jason Alexander, before Seinfeld, he was one of the most likable characters in the movie. He was funny. He stood up for the nerds, the ones who were picked on, but he was cool enough that the bullies didn't mess with him either. And likable, and he has a full head of hair. That's another thing. Jason Alexander has a full head of hair in this movie. He's a normal dude. It was just weird seeing him in such a role. And how weird is it that Holly Hunter doesn't have any speaking lines? She's just one of the campers who's walking around is in it. How interesting it is that this is the movie that launched her career too. This launched Holly Hunter, Jason Alexander, Bob and Harvey Weinstein. You could tell that this movie made a lot of people in the industry.
And Holly Hunter was saying that she was basically a glorified extra, and she was getting paid like $1,000 a day. So that shows why everyone in front of and behind the camera are competent professionals, because they paid people good money.
So overall, this is to me just like, I know I sound like I'm gushing, but to me this is like the ultimate standard 80s slasher. I'm not including like Nightmare on Elm Street or stuff like that, because that's more of a reinvention of the slasher and more of a reinvigoration, and it's not traditional. You know what I mean? Like Freddy Krueger, Wes Craven found a whole new angle for slasher movies, so I'm not even counting that. But for like traditional slasher movies that are just about a killer going after teens, summer camp movies, whatever you want to call them, this for me sits at the top of the pile and might be my favorite of the traditional 80s slasher movies. It's everything I like, everything I love to them, done so much better, and burnished to damn near perfection. And as a horror fan, it's nice to see something like this. It was nice to see a slasher movie that is, yes, trashy, yes, sleazy, yes, it's violent, yes, it has all those disreputable things that people like about slashers, but made with a skill that's kind of uncommon in its genre. And it's funny, slasher movies do not have to be well made for me to enjoy them. I enjoy them on a different level. They mean something. This is one of the slasher movies that I feel like I can enjoy on two different levels.
Yeah, I love movies like this where it's a really well-made slasher overall. The story's really good, the characters are really good, but it also has a lot of little moments. I think that to make something truly special, you have to take an overall aesthetic and then add a bunch of little details in there that make it stand out and make it something special. Like it's a silly little detail, but like when Sally finally has sex with Glazer, and then he's kind of a quick draw McGraw, so she's like, "That's it." I thought that was such a great moment.
You don't see that in slasher movies. And another thing, I think, a thing that it needs to be addressed, one particular scene that I find really effective, this actually shows the trauma that kids would have knowing that their friends have been hacked and slashed up, and knowing that there's a killer on the loose. There's a scene where the kids are all, after they discover a bunch of their friends, where they're all sitting there crying, and then one of the lead camp counselors is leading them to another part of the camp, and she's telling the guy there, there's a killer out there, like there's a kill. And it's like, stop messing around. And then she turns and says, do I look like I'm messing around? Look at the kids. And they look so destroyed and so distraught. And I was like, you never actually see that in the slasher movies, the trauma that these kids are going through in the moment. Because when you look at the kids, you could see how hopeless they look, and you could see how disturbed they are, and you could see that they're probably going to have to be in therapy for years after they leave this camp. And I thought that was something that also made it a special slasher, is being able to show the actual trauma, like showing that the violence has consequences and it affects people in ways that will change their lives forever. I feel like that's barely ever addressed in the slasher movie. I don't think this movie like explores it or that's what it's about, but it's addressed. And I think that's also something that separates it.
Yeah, you never lose sight that there's actually kids at the camp. Because usually slashers, once they start concentrating on those, either a group of kids or it's usually the counselors. Once they start concentrating on them, you just forget that kids are even there. And not only that, you get to see the trauma that they experience, like that raft ride when they were trying to get out of there. They were whimpering and crying because of what they just saw. And then there's a moment that I really like just before that, when we know as a viewer that it's a raft full of dead bodies. And they see it kind of float into their view. So they're like, oh, there they are. They're trying to play a trick. And then the main counselor kind of gets in the water and swims out to it. Well, while she's swimming out to it, you got Todd, who's just been attacked by the killer. He's running to the scene and trying to warn them. So you get the meeting of the two main leads, the main counselors.
It's two kind of action building at the same time.
Exactly, yeah. Kind
of like using clever editing, because it builds tension as she gets closer to the He gets closer and inches closer to the raft, and then it cuts to the kid running to warn them. Cut back to that back and forth. It builds tension simultaneously on two different levels, and you just don't see that in slasher movies. You don't see enough of that.
Yeah, and you just got through seeing a scene where somebody was approaching the raft or approaching the canoe, and all of a sudden that's when the massacre happens. So you're thinking, as this counselor is approaching the raft, is this going to be another Cropsy jumps out and attacks? And is Todd going to get there before her? It's a really exciting little scene.
Yeah. And it's a short movie, too. It's like all slashers, it's a short movie. It only runs an hour and 30 minutes. Packs a lot of character, packs a lot of gore. It's able to be a slow burn at the same time. It makes you care for the characters. It's rare to see like a slasher that does as much as this does in such a short amount of time. And to make you feel like they're not skimping on the violence, because I think like other than the beginning scene where a hooker is killed before the camp, before we even get to the camp, I think it's like a solid, and it's only an hour and a half. I think it's like at least a solid 45 minutes before the first like real slasher at the camp or slasher kill at the camp actually occurs. So like it takes half the movie to even get to that point. You don't see that too often in slashers. They want to start up right away and get to the hacking and slashing. They don't really give you that much time to get to know the characters. Not that you would want to anyway, because most of the time they're so poorly written and trill. Yeah. It's waiting for the character to show up. The killer to show up. This is the exact opposite. You kind of get sad at the thought of certain characters dying or not making it to the end.
Yeah, it holds your interest and remains exciting, but even when there's no kills on the screen, there's always the threat of a kill.
Yeah.
And you always feel that, and you feel like you get to know all the characters without spending too much time with any of them. Like there's quite a bit of characters that I felt like I knew by the end, a lot more than I usually do in slashers.
Yeah. So this movie was available on Shudder. It came on Shudder not too long ago, and it was only there for a month before it was removed. So it's not available to stream in any format at the current moment. I do not know why that is or why Shudder only had it for like about a month before they got rid of it. I think it was maybe a little over, maybe a couple months, but they only had it for a brief amount of time. However, there is a Scream Factory edition of this film on Blu-ray, so all you horror collectors, all you aficionados, this is worth having in your collection. I could say if you're a slasher movie cult exploitation, I think this is one of those movies that you could safely get as a blind buy and not worry about the product that you're going to end up with when you actually watch it. I ordered myself a copy because I saw that it was no longer on Shudder because I don't want to be at the mercy of a streaming service. It's worth owning. I want to have it in my collection. I want to be able to pull it out and watch it whenever I want. I want to be able to show this movie to people. I feel like not enough horror fans have seen the brand. I know there's plenty who have, but I feel like it needs more exposure because it's so much better than a lot of other slashers that had a bigger impact than this one did.
Yeah, it's not just a must-see, it's a must-own.
Yeah. Any horror collector.
This must be in your collection. It'd be great. Anything by Tom Savini, but this is especially up there with some of his best work.
Agreed. I wish I could say that about this next film.
Yeah. So the next one, what was originally based on the Cropsy legend, just like The Burning, but the filmmakers found out about The Burning being filmed just down the street while they were filming this. So the director and the producer got together, and they had to change the story enough for it to be different from The Burning in order to do it. It's directed and co-written by Joe Giannone, with the help on the story from producer Gary Sales. It's about, once again, counselors at a summer camp for gifted youths, but it's actually a fall camp, are stalked and killed by Madman Mars. It's loosely based on the Cropsy killer in Staten Island, and it's made by people from Staten Island, but it's filmed in the Hamptons. So it stars Galen Ross, and Joe Bob explained to this how Galen Ross didn't even want her name mentioned. She called herself Alexis Dublin when she made it.
I think a lot of people had fake names when they used this movie. Hardly anybody actually went by their real name.
Yeah, and her previous credits were Dawn of the Dead and Creepshow, so that's why they got her. and then Tony the Fish as TP. This is his only film role. I got a kick out of that guy, I must admit. But like I said before, this one begins right away with the story of Madman Mars. They're sitting around the campfire, and it just jumps right into the story as if we're just jumping in the middle of it. And then the creepy song from TP, he's like singing around the campfire, like singing a scary song. And as he goes around the campfire to each character, you see a glimpse of their death. Mm-hmm. It was a cheesy song. The guy was a cheese ball, but I fucking love TP, dude.
See, this is like I kind of feel bad for this. You mentioned this was being written around the same time that The Burning was being made, and they're both based on the Cropsy legend. These two films, the filmmakers on Madman had no idea that there was another film going on simultaneously about the Cropsy legend. It's kind of incredible, and the movies always seem to come in twos. Whenever a subject is finally tackled, I don't know what the universe is, there's always two movies about that. You ever noticed?
Yeah.
They come at it from different angles. There's always two. And because the Cropsy legend is not a widely known legend, it's actually pretty obscure. It's kind of more of a, was it Long Island or New Jersey?
It was Staten Island.
Staten Island. It's a Staten Island legend, and it's not particularly, known outside of Staten Island. So for this obscure legend to make it into two different scripts right around the same time when it had never even been used before is kind of interesting and unfortunate for the filmmakers of Madman, because one of the actresses that was on Madman, I don't remember who it was, but her boyfriend was working on The Burning the same time, and she came to the directors and mentioned it's just so similar to the movie that their boyfriend's working on. They were like, they got concerned, so they finally got a hold of The Burning script to see what it was, and they realized that they were making a movie about the Cropsy legend. Not only were they making a movie about the Cropsy legend, they were way ahead of them on the production, and the budget was a lot bigger for The Burning than it was for Madman. So it caused the filmmakers to scramble to kind of rework the script around and make it loosely based on Cropsy instead of an actual Cropsy movie. And what we end up with is Madman.
And I'll have to admit, it's kind of unfair to talk about these two movies, because if I hadn't have seen or just rewatched The Burning, and I've watched it a couple times before, but if I hadn't had the Burning so fresh in my mind, I would have enjoyed Madman more, because it was a similar story with much less budget, and I usually like the imagination and the fun that comes along and the creativity that comes along with a low budget. But The Burning had that charm. It had the charm and magic of a lower budget film with a high budget. That's the thing.
And that's hard to compete with. When you have all the things that make the low budget movie special with the sheen of a bigger budget movie on top of it, at that point, it's really hard to compete. That's what makes the indie movies stand out, the indie versions of these movies stand out. It's the creativity, it's the imagination. When somebody else is putting even more creativity and more imagination with more money to realize that imagination, there's no way you could compete. So let's be fair, these are not fair comparisons, but I do think that they should be discussed in context with each other. And I think as far as slasher movie history goes, these movies are always going to be forever twined because of the story, the production history, the time they came out, and what happened, the outcomes. And honestly, this is not a bad slasher movie, Madman. It's not one of the great slasher movies. I have to admit, I actually watched this earlier in the year for the first time. So I rewatched it for this podcast. I have to admit, I've seen a ton of obscure 80s slasher movies. This is not amongst the best of them. It's decent enough for what it is, but I think as far as slasher movie goes, I think it's like what Joe Bob said. I think it's lasted a lot because the cover of Madman looks so cool that people in video stores made it a cult hit just because of that artwork that they saw. The movie does not quite live up to its reputation as one of the great slashers. And when Joe Bob special, he mentioned how people are going to say Madman is one of the great slashers, and he says, but it's not. It's really actually not. It's not. So I feel like mentioning in context as one of the great slashers is going to produce disappointment with this movie. I think it's better just to remember it as a 80s slasher movie, not one of the best 80s slasher movies.
Well, pretty much all the charm of The Burning came from how good it was and how well put together it was and how the opposite of bad it was.
Mm-hmm.
But on the opposite side of the spectrum, there are things that are very entertaining about Madman. Let's just face it, they're bad.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the bad things about it are still entertaining, like the song that TP sang around the campfire. Cheesy as hell, but I was entertained. I'm still laughing about it. Huh?
It's one of the best things about the movie.
Yeah.
I think another area where this movie suffers in comparison to The Burning is in its gore effects. It's not that they're bad. They're actually pretty decent gore effects, but they can't compete with Tom Savini's effects, and they're shown very briefly because they know that they can't linger on it too long because it's going to reveal the fakeness behind it. So it works for what it is, but compared to like the elaborate effects in The Burning and the camera work that lets you really take all of it in and explore, as like these come up pretty short. You could tell what you're seeing. It's gory, but it goes by in the blink of the eye because, you know, filmmakers are aware that they can't leave their camera there too long. Otherwise, they're going to ruin the effect of the kill that they just made. So there are some effective kill scenes in here. They're not in the upper echelon of slasher movie kills either. And unlike The Burning, I feel like at a certain point, it's like the kids don't even exist in the film after a certain point.
Yeah.
Like they disappeared from the movie. Like they were never, almost like they were fucking never there in the first place. I'm like, so who's watching after? Is like nobody. There's like when they realize that there's a killer after them and they're going after him. Like who's going after the kids? Like aren't you like thinking about like let's go like protect the kids? But it's almost like they just completely disappeared from the movie. And I just can't help but laugh at that. So it's like, what? It never happened. They didn't exist. It's so weird. I don't know. That always has been so weird to me how movies, those summer camp slashers, could pretend that we didn't see all those children there at the beginning.
Yeah, they barely even acknowledge that there are any kids in the camp. And then it has some decent kill scenes. Like that first kill scene, it was a nice little scare and a nice throat rip. But right before that scene, you had the cheesy axe in the stump bit where it's kind of like a sword in the stone. And that was cheesy. And then right after the throat rip, this nice scene, you get the awkward hot tub scene where it's like really bad music playing. And by the way, the music's playing in the hot tub is TP, that character. It's his music.
Oh, that was terrible. There's no reason for that to even be there. You're waiting for it to build towards something. I'm like, so they just showed us an awkward bathtub scene. Just because, and it's just there. I was like, you know, I'm not convinced that taking that out is going to ruin this movie. In fact, it might make it go by a little snappier because it's dumb. Like, it's actually actively dumb while you're watching it, and you wonder why you're watching it, and you're hoping it builds to something, and it doesn't. It's just stupid.
Yeah, and then you go from that to the couple having sex in the tent, and that Ellie, the girl of the couple, how ditzy and like weird was she? Like she seemed all flighty, and she had like a munchkin voice, and she was annoying.
She almost seemed fake. Like I could see too much effort put into that performance. It's like when you're overthinking your role and you're trying to put all these details to try to create like a textured character. I get what she was going for, but it doesn't feel organic. It feels like actorly tricks to try to like he talks this way and she does. I could see too many of the actors' tricks going on for any of that to be convincing to me. But
then all that was followed by another pretty good kill when I'm not going to say who it is, but the guy's pulled up in a tree and hung in a tree.
That was effective.
It looked like a pretty realistic hanging, and then the killer just kind of comes up and pulls on his belt, kind of breaks his neck. That was pretty cool.
So there's some decent kill scenes in this, but they're not amongst, for me anyway, like the very best of like slasher movie kills. And you know, you got to go to the Prowler before you got to get to this. You got to get to The Burning. You got to get to Intruder. Or so many other ones that I think do what this does a lot better. Even a lot of the Friday the 13th sequels do what this does better, I think.
But still, the the kills were more realistic than the characters were, I must say.
Mhm. It has like I don't know. There's an admirable DIY like quality and some kind of charm to it in certain scenes that I like. I think the design of Madman Mars is fairly creative. It's not particularly scary per se, but it's eye-catching and it's an interesting design. I mean, it's an enjoyable slasher movie that lives in the shadow of The Burning, and it's been elevated to cult status because the cover art is far superior to the film behind it, in my view.
Well, that cover art is based on the best shots of the killer, which were his silhouette.
Mm-hmm.
I think like with him hanging up in the tree, and you can kind of see the outline of his scraggly hair.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty scary. But then once you see the killer, it's kind of not scary anymore. It's just has some kind of Santa Claus looking dude running around.
Oh, and how funny was the refrigerator hiding spot?
Oh, yeah.
That was one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. The refrigerator hiding spot. And then only hiding there for like a brief amount of time and going, okay, I guess everything's fine. I mean, that's a stupid spot in the first place because you fucking basically have holed yourself in. But if you're going to stick to it, you might as well commit to it. You know what I mean? Just comes out right after what, 30 seconds? He's gone! I'm like, come on! This is like where The Burning is free of all that idiocy and the stupidity on the part of the characters. This one revels in it. It is just loaded with dumb decision after dumb decision after dumb decision, where after a while I'm like, y'all are getting yourselves killed.
Yeah. Well, there was only one scene in The Burning that came off as silly to me. Only one. When it was the big showdown at the end, flamethrower versus axe. You know, and the Cropsy killer starts approaching with the flamethrower, and all of a sudden the flamethrower goes out, and Todd thinks he's safe, and he starts sneaking around some more. It's basically Madman was a bunch of moments of that, where in The Burning it was just that one moment.
Yeah, it's fleeting. Pokes its head like and here's my issue with this movie. Like I said, it's not a bad slasher movie because I've seen worse. I've also seen better. While I don't think it's fair to compare it with The Burning, even in the class of all the slasher movies that are out there, whether it's Sleepaway Camp or the Slumber Party Massacre or The Burning, or there's so many different, the House on Sorority Row, this one does not, for me, stand up with like the top marks of the genre. I feel like there are a lot of things that do the same thing that this does much better. And it's not just because it suffers in comparison to The Burning. I do think that there are a lot better versions of this movie that exist.
Yeah, and on this one, it was full of moments for me, like moments that I liked, rather than it being a full, effective experience.
The
like
Prowler is better than this. Terror Train, Prom Night, Happy Birthday to Me, Bloody Birthday, Nightmare, The House on Sorority Row, Pieces, The Mutilator, Slumber Party Massacre 1 and 2, Silent Night, Deadly Night. All of these slasher movies I could think of are actually better than this one. I feel like there's a lot of them that kind of deserve the reputation that this one has.
Well, it does have the truck hood decapitation. That one was pretty cool.
You know what? I actually think that's probably the best kill in the movie.
Yeah, because the character's under the hood, and he kind of just climbs over the cab and just jumps down onto the hood. I thought that was a pretty effective and simple kill. And then they find the person's head in the motor later.
Yeah, that was pretty funny. But yeah, like it's weird. Like there's some like the kills are enjoyable, but I found myself laughing at them when they were enjoyable. In The Burning, I thought, oh shit, like I just saw something like traumatizing or actually scared me. So I think that's like the biggest difference. And doesn't some of the hokiness remind you of like old school porno quality?
Oh yeah.
I hate to say that because I know that sounds like a big slight, but some of it reminds me of like old, really bad porn. The level of acting and the cheesiness. that goes into a lot of the character interactions. That's the vibe that I got off of it.
But the flirting and making out was even more awkward than a porno.
Yeah, far more awkward.
But I do like that the annoying character got a accidental shot to the face. Like, she didn't even get killed by the killer.
That was pretty funny. See, it's things like that. I was laughing at it. Now, don't be wrong. There's a lot of slasher movies that I laugh at. This one is something else, though. In terms of laughing at it.
There's a pretty funny tidbit about the leaves where it took way longer to film than they anticipated. So they had started filming it in the summer, and then fall came, and the leaves started changing, so they had to paint the leaves on the trees green.
Well, you do what you can. You do what you can.
Yeah.
Can't do too much for that.
And then the girl on the hook totally reminded me of Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, it did, but not as good.
Yeah.
It did. But for me, this movie is not. How would I recommend this? I would recommend this to slasher aficionados, like people who the slasher fic. I mean, if you're a big horror fan, you might want to see it historically, but it's not of like a lot of the slasher movies that exist. I feel like there's a lot more. If you're trying to like really get and dive into the subgenre, I think there's a lot more that you could watch before you get to Madman.
Well, there are some things that it does well. Like, it's pretty good at finding ways to kill off most of the characters without the other characters knowing it. That's kind of one of the things it kind of does well. Yeah. But just, like I said, watching it next to The Burning, it just makes it look really bad. So if you're going to watch this one, watch it on its own and judge it by its own merit. Because if you watch it next to a superior one that has a lot of similar aspects to it. And there was one similarity that I noticed. Did you notice that both movies, this one and The Burning, both had one of the main characters who kind of liked a guy that was a dick?
Mm-hmm.
Where they were kind of scared of them, but they still kind of liked them, were intrigued by them.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of a weird parallel.
Mm-hmm.
But the Burning was definitely a little worse as far as guys pushing themselves on women who didn't want their advances.
I will say that it's a little less sleazy than The Burning is too. A little less. Yeah. I would say.
But it's much cheaper in many levels.
This one right now is available on still for anybody who wants to watch it or check it out. You could watch it on its own. I would recommend watching it on The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs because you'll get a lot more background on the movie and it might actually help you appreciate it better for what it is. And if you want to make this a double feature with The Burning, my recommending is that you program this first and then finish off with The Burning.
Yeah, definitely.
That would be a much more satisfying experience because you'll throw on like, you know, a typical slasher movie, you'll have fun with it, and then you'll finish off with a typical slasher movie but done unbelievably well. So I think that in terms of a double feature, you definitely should watch Madman first because The Burning will deflate it if you put that one in front of it.
Yeah, for sure.
So we have one last to discuss. Go on, what you're going to say, though.
Yes, this one is a documentary. It's Survival of the Film Freaks from 2018, written and directed by Bill Fulkerson and Kyle Kucha. It explores the phenomenon of cult films and how they survive through the decades. And I love how it's broken up. I actually originally saw it at the Arena Cine Lounge. It's a little small theater next to the ArcLight. So anytime you guys see little movies like this, especially all these docs that are coming out, because there's documentaries like this on many levels. Like this was done like more of a grassroots type of thing where it was smaller filmmakers kind of putting it together. And then you also have bigger filmmakers putting together these really impressive large-scale docs. So anytime you see one of these screening or on a streaming service, Shudder has a lot of them, Amazon Prime has some of them. There's some fascinating little documentaries, and this one is no different. We hear from people like Ted Raimi, Adam Green, Joe Bob Briggs, of course, Lloyd Kaufman, Kansas Bowling, Rob Galuzzo from the
What is
perv
commonly known as Shockwaves.
from Shockwaves. Yeah, former host at Shockwaves.
I know every time he appeared on screen, I was like, oh, poor documentarians. This part has not aged well.
Yeah.
But besides the point.
But as you can see by the list of people that I named, it's not a lot of big players in the industry, but that's the point.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is about cult films. It's about filmmakers who fly under the radar and have these films that stand the test of time. And like some of the people say, it's cult films are for people who do not see themselves in mainstream movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that easily like 90%, 95% of my taste in movies comes from cult movies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't particularly like mainstream movies as a whole. There are some gems in there, like Quentin Tarantino. They talk about him because he brought the cult film sensibility to Hollywood, to a bigger budget, you know.
Like say he's like the gateway into cult and exploitation movies. He basically does a much more polished, Hollywoodized version of that. And I don't mean that as a complaint. I actually think that's a good thing because it kind of broadens the audience. And I think because of Quentin Tarantino, I think there are a lot more cult film fans because of him, because he has such a dedicated following. And I know that he was one of like a favorite of mine. Like he was one of the reasons I got into movies, where if you study what he likes, you're going to go down a rabbit hole of a lot of art movies, yes, classics, yes, stuff like Scorsese, you know, those great 70s flicks, but you're also going to go down a rabbit hole of exploitation movies, cult films, grindhouse. And I think what Quentin Tarantino has managed to do, he's married the sensibility of low-budget cult movies to the sensibilities and the polish and sheen of big-budget, star-studded motion pictures with beautiful productions and lavish money spent into Hollywood. He's like the best of both worlds. He makes cult movies that cult movie lovers can enjoy, and people who don't like cult movies could enjoy. He is something completely rare within them. They do spend a little bit of time discussing his influence on cult films and how he's one of the people that helped to foster a lot of a deeper appreciation for cult movies, especially in the 1990s.
And it's amazing that he held on to that sensibility, even all the way up to his last one, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It holds on to that cult sensibility. And that's almost unheard of, because every filmmaker that's plucked up by these big studios think they have to sell out to the vision of these big studios, but he's one of those rare filmmakers who don't. And some of the films you can expect in this documentary, and some of the things that are discussed, are werewolves on wheels, blaxploitation films, biker movies, women in prison movies, El Topo, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Mad Max, Foxy Brown, Night of the Creeps, Evil Dead, slashers, kung fu movies, Ghoulies, The Blob, Driller Killer, Eraserhead, Fulci movies, Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, Hard Ticket to Hawaii, Demon Knight, Showgirls, and everything in between. It's a really wide-ranging.
You're forgetting one gem, my favorite title, Vasectomy, the movie.
Yeah.
I have to know, what the hell is that? It's on my list now.
This is one of those documentaries where it could have been 4 or 5 hours, because it is a massive undertaking to try to cover all cult films, because they cover a wide range of budgets, a wide range of filmmakers, genres,
Style.
but yeah. So it goes through, but I like the way it structures it. It takes this massive subject and it structures it almost into like beats of a story, where it kind of starts out defining what cult movies are and what they mean to the fans. And then they kind of transition into how things changed in the 70s. How in the 70s, low-level filmmakers could finally make movies for the first time. Like it was only big Hollywood productions that could do movies like this. So in the 70s, that kind of changed. And then they went through like the seedy underbelly of cult films, like I'm showing 42nd Street and Midnight Movies. And then they started exploring the 80s, where video stores start coming into the mix. And then I like how they show like the video stores. I remember that when the video stores started dividing their cult films into these weird subgenres. And they made another good point. Just the artwork of cult films, and especially horror films, just those stark colors and the contrast with the blacks and the greens and the reds kind of just pops out at you from the video store shelf.
Which brings me back to Madman.
Exactly.
Madman is one of those movies that became a cult film because of its cover, because of the cover art.
Yeah. And a lot of them are like that, and they talk about how they see this impressive cover art where this big monster will have big machine guns on his shoulder and everything, and then they watch the actual movie, and none of that is in it that's on the cover. I used to hate those movies. They'd have this big impressive cover, and then I watched the movie, and nothing on the cover was in the movie.
I think that's what's the impressive thing about cult and exploitation movies. Was one of the cool things about it is that, like, you could look at a cover and it's titillating or it's sensational or it's so out there that you just have to see what the contents of that movie are because it's so drawn in. And they discuss this in the documentary. A lot of those times, those movies are very disappointing. The posters are better than the movies. The trailers are better. The advertising for it is better. Madman is a perfect example of that. There's a ton of movies that will let you down, that look you think you're going to get something really fun and trashy, and then you just get something trashy, but not necessarily fun. But I think that was for a lot of early cult audiences, that was the joy, was the discovery. You never know, you might get a gem. And you pick so many, you pop one in, and then you be surprised by what you see. Now, they mentioned this in the documentary too, the drawback of the internet kind of erases discovery, because you could look through the list of like the 10 goriest cult movies, the 50 best cult movies you should see, and people say that takes away the fun. I personally have to disagree with that. I only have so much time in my life, and I want to see as many of these movies as possible, but I can only see so many. I would rather have the ones that are going to bore me weeded out before I get to it. So yeah, I know that I don't get that sense of discovery. I totally get that. But I don't think everybody has the time in their life to be looking through a bunch of movies that they don't like to finally get to that gem. So I do think it's a good thing that the internet exists and that we have this list, so you could get to the gold in the trash, so that you could find the best of the trash, the gold, the ones that are really worth seeking, the ones that really pop out. If a cult movie appears on several lists online on Google, people suggesting, it's probably going to be something good. It's probably something interesting. If that many cult movie lovers love it, there's probably something to it. So I do kind of see the drawback with the lack of discovery, but I like that I was able to, this year in quarantine, look up a bunch of cult and slasher movies and get through like the best of them, where I felt like I liked most of what I'd seen. You know what I mean? So I guess it just depends on your perspective. And it's maybe just because I'm from a different era, so this is what's better for me. So there's a lot of like debate in there with topics like that about what's the proper way to discover something. And I disagree with some of the points in the movie, but they are valid points, though. Yeah.
And after while they were exploring the 80s, they touched briefly on Laserdiscs. Now, I remember when Laserdisc came up, because this was my time, because I was a little kid in the 80s and the 70s, so I didn't get into watching any exploitation films or anything then. But then when the 80s came and video VHS was introduced, then that was my time. That was my time to explore all these weird little movies. But then when Laserdiscs came, shit, they were too expensive. They were like $90, $100 each. So by the time I could afford Laserdiscs, they weren't around anymore. So they discussed it in the 80s. Briefly, there was Laserdisc, and then here comes cable. And cable really changed the game because there was a huge demand for content. And I like how they talk about the old, how HBO used to be. Like, they used to play tons of movies over and over and over again, where it's like Adam Green said, the HBO used to, they used to make fun of it, and that it stood for, "Hey, Beastmaster's on," because it was always on. And they had a good point about these cable channels just constantly playing these movies on a loop, where it kind of force you into watching a movie that you would never normally watch, and then it becomes one of your favorites. But it has to be forced upon you first, and nothing's really forced upon us anymore, because like you said, we have so many choices of what we can watch now.
See, I do think that there's pros and cons, the argument, like the modern way of things, but ultimately, I wouldn't want to go back to the old way, even though I feel like you are missing some of that sense of discovery. And to be honest, streaming is not the same thing as going to a video store and looking at them. There is something special. As a little kid in the 90s, I remember that. I get the sense of loss for that. But there's always a trade-off for these things, so maybe we don't get that anymore. But at the same time, if things were still the way they were, if streaming wasn't a thing, I don't think I would have been able to have seen a fraction of all the exploitation and slasher movies that I got to watch under quarantine. And ultimately, I can't help but think that's a good thing because it's widened my access to what I can see. It's easier for me to get to. I have a list of titles on my watch list on my Amazon queue that I'm just waiting to go. I think the trade-off for me is worth it because it would have taken me longer to get through all of these movies. I was able to watch multiple in a day. There were times where I watched 2 or 3 cult or exploitation movies in a day. That's kind of hard to do when you have to keep going to the video store, looking around and stuff. So there's a trade-off, you know what I mean? And I think the trade-off is worth it, though I do understand the nostalgia. I do.
And I would see how people would think that the arrival of the internet would kind of hurt the trashier movies because people aren't as forced into seeing it. But
Did the opposite.
There is an audience for the trashy movies, and you wouldn't realize how big the audience was if it wasn't for the internet.
See, I think the internet made it easier for people who are into this to access these movies. So I think, and if anything, the sense of connection you get on the internet when you encounter other people who are collectors, anything, it kind of broadened the appreciation for these types of movies because you realize that there's a whole community of people out there that love these movies, that they think they're the best. They're not interested in Hollywood movies. They're not interested in the latest Marvel movie or whatever it may be. For them, this is it. And I think the internet has made it easier to access. So if anything, streaming, while there are some drawbacks to it, I think it actually has helped a reputation a lot of these movies, and it's helped these movies to grow bigger audiences, and it's helped the cults behind these films to grow even bigger than they were before. So I still have to say it's more positive than negative, despite a lot of the drawbacks. But to be clear, any way you access or get these movies, there's always going to be some kind of drawback to it. Yeah. You have to take the good with the bad.
Well, I like what that one guy said. Like, cinephiles are getting into this trash because they realize that if you're going to be interested in all types of cinema, you can't just stop at the trash.
If you're
because there's some gems in there, just like there are high cinema, from the greatest directors like Scorsese and Tarantino and all the greats. There's also these little movies that are trashy and some of them are even stupid, but they're fun, they're entertaining, they're original, they're titillating,
They stick out in your head more.
Exactly. And it goes back to what I said before, where these people with lower budgets and less resources have to really think on their toes and come up with creative ways to depict these horrible things happening on screen.
Yeah.
And I love how when they switched to the 90s, they called it the 80s, but with politics. And that's kind of accurate.
When they started injecting more political elements into a lot of the exploitation movies and stuff like that.
And that's when they brought up Tarantino, and then the big, huge change when DVDs took over. I remember what a huge impact that was on the industry.
It was into Blu-ray, which is interesting because it never grew up the way that DVD did. But as far as collectors go, it's a collector's medium. Because there are so many cult and exploitation movies, thanks to places like Scream and Shout and Blue Underground, Vinegar Syndrome, all of these like specialty companies that go for like these cult movies. These are things that you would never think would be available in a pristine, high format edition loaded with extras. These are not the movies that you think get like the royal, almost like the Criterion treatment. But there are companies, that's one of the cool things about Blu-ray. They become a specialty thing. It's niche. It's for collectors, for people who want to own these movies in the highest possible editions available, people who want to be able to physically have it in front of them. And I actually ordered The Burning last night after watching Survival of the Film Freaks because it convinced me that it was worth owning, that I don't want to have to be at the mercy. So that's the reason I ended up buying The Burning, this documentary.
And I see why this is called Survival of the Film Freaks, because these cult films and this trash that we're talking about, it survives no matter what. Like in the 80s, it talked about, you know, VHS and stuff and how cable changed everything. Yes, it changed everything, but it also reinvigorated it in a way.
Yep.
And then you have, in the 90s, you have the DVDs coming along, changing everything, making a better picture. And then within the same decade, you have the internet coming. Mm-hmm. And it kind of turns the industry upside down, and it starts the decline of physical media and DVDs. Mm-hmm. But then you have companies like Vinegar Syndrome, like you mentioned, Vinegar Syndrome and Synapse Films and Severin, companies like that, bringing it back to the forefront and giving, like I said, these movies will always find an audience. There's always an audience there for them, whether they're new or old.
Yeah. Yep.
And then when the internet came into play and then the DVDs started declining, then you have piracy coming into play. And they had a nice little conversation on that. I'd like to see it explored more. But they made the point that it was the best for the viewer, but the worst for filmmakers. Mm-hmm. But when things become the worst for filmmakers, that's going to come back around and it's going to bite the viewers in the ass because you're going to get less content. But then you see streaming coming along, which kind of takes the sting out of piracy. Mm-hmm. Because it gives people a platform where filmmakers can still get paid. And mind you, I still don't think they get paid enough. Mm-hmm. But it still allows filmmakers to get paid, and it gives people an easy alternative. Instead of having to sit there and wait for a movie to download and take up that room in their hard drive, they can just stream it.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about streaming is that piracy is never going to go away. I do think we've got away from the height of it, though. I don't think it's like nearly as bad as it used to be because of, like you said, because of the streaming, and like because of Joe Bob said. Like me personally, and I think anybody, when you see a movie that's available for $1.99, available to stream, that's fucking $2. That ain't shit. You could just go ahead and play, as opposed to searching all day, downloading a big file, not making sure where it's going to take all day. Like, the effort is not worth it. It's actually worth it more just to pay $2 so you don't have to spend your entire day looking for something. It's so much more convenient. It's easier. It's cheaper. It allows the filmmakers to give their investment back, and it's at a good enough price that they don't feel the need to go and, you know, pirate it. So I do think that streaming has been a great benefit to filmmakers. It didn't kill piracy, but I think it curbed it a lot. Whereas I think it was out of control, it went down to a more steady, where it's not good, but I don't think it's as damaging as it once was.
Yeah, I think when it was first introduced, like right after Napster came about, and people were downloading on a massive level, I thought it was a disaster for the business.
It was.
But then you know, with the advent of streaming, then it takes a little bit of the sting out of it. It's not as bad, but it's still bad. I mean, filmmakers still suffer. Like us as filmmakers, we haven't felt the sting of piracy yet because we're not at that level. We're still at the level where you want to see our movie for free? Hell yeah, more exposure. Mm-hmm. But no, once we get up a little bit higher and we're trying to make a living at this, then that's going to be a problem because you see and hear Adam Green talk about it. That poor man is traumatized. Mm-hmm. He has been victimized by this piracy thing where even fans brag to him about how they pirated his stuff. Mm-hmm. And things where he has lost opportunities and lost deals directly because of piracy. Where he was supposed to get distribution, and he was supposed to get one of the Hatchet films in the theaters. Mm-hmm. But then it was pirated so much that he went to a meeting with the distributors, and they showed him a printout that said, look, this movie's already been downloaded like so many thousands of times. It's really not worth it for us to distribute. Like, fuck, dude. That's when it really destroys filmmakers' careers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, And just so you're there, if you're into piracy, just be aware, the more that you pirate all these movies that you say that you love, the less you're going to get of them. Because if you can't make your money back, then there's no justification for these movies to get made. So that's why a lot of people, they want to whine, they want to bitch about it, they want to complain. But fuck it, dude. If that's how you want to be, then you're not going to get it. Because you know why? It takes a lot of time to make a movie. And a lot of people say that they're entitled to it. I don't think people actually understand what filmmaking is. They don't know what it's like to step on a set. It's long. It's stressful. It requires a lot of hard work, a lot of patience, a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money. Like any product that somebody puts their money in, you are not entitled to it just because you think. You wouldn't say that about any other good that's being made that people are putting their time into. You don't think that you're entitled to it. You think you have to pay for it. So I don't know what makes people think that you're entitled to somebody else's hard work. And complaining after, and these are the same people who like to bitch and moan, oh, nothing original is being made anymore because it's like, fuck you. The reason it's not being made anymore is because you won't pay for it. So investors have no fucking reason to do it at all. So I don't like the piracy bullshit. I think I'm probably getting a little bit more pissed on this podcast than I intended to, but I don't see any legitimate argument. It is still a product. Yes, it's art, but it's a product that costs more than most art to make too. You cannot say that making a painting costs nearly as much as making a film does. Like if you say that, you're delusional. Like there is no way that requires the same amount of people, the same amount of team. People work 16-hour days. What entitles you to that? What makes you think you're entitled to somebody else's? You wouldn't do that for any other product. So why is it justified for films? And the answer, it isn't. You just convinced yourself that it was.
Well, there's a million excuses why an individual...
All bullshit.
Yeah, an individual justifies it to himself because an individual downloading something is not going to make a difference to anyone. Mm-hmm. So that they don't think outside of that scope of their own little bubble where I'm not hurting anybody. Oh, they're not going to miss my...
You are.
They're not going to miss the few bucks I would have spent on that. But you're not understanding that it's happening on a massive scale, and you're normalizing it, and you're sharing it with your friends online and in these groups. That's what pisses me off so much when people go into these groups and they brag about downloading something.
You know, in those film groups online, a lot of the admins will kick you out if you talk about piracy because a lot of the admins are filmmakers and are aware. So don't get surprised when you go on to your little forums and Facebook and then you get kicked out for piracy. That's your fucking fault. And if you want it, pay for it. If you want to see more stuff like this, then pay for it. So that way, when investors see, oh, look, this movie made money. All these people thought that this product was worth owning, is worth having, is worth seeing. Therefore, I'm going to take this filmmaker and I'm going to sponsor another one of his movies. Now, when you don't do that, you lose on all these films that you claim to be upset. It's a business. It is a business. Yes, it is an art, but people cannot make these things unless they want money. So if you really like your films, if you really truly support your artists, pay for them. I will say this one exception. There are certain cases where there is no way impossible where distributors have made a forgotten film, a gem, almost impossible to track down, but illegally. If I know for a fact that they've cut off any option, that there's no way to watch it for free, there's no legal copy to get, there's no way to stream it, there's absolutely no way, then I could cave in and do it. But that is literally the only time, is if I am left with absolutely no option at all.
Yeah. And we can talk about piracy and we can talk about how it damages the filmmaker. But let's face it, I'm looking at you too, streaming services. Mm-hmm. The streaming services and these distributors now, they're taking advantage of piracy too, because they're taking advantage of filmmakers who are so frightened and so taken aback by piracy that they're willing to accept this chump change from these streaming services like Amazon. And we just seen a filmmaker that we know last week talking about how on Amazon they're selling his DVD for like $15, and he's getting like $3 off of each DVD.
That's absurd.
So it's the streaming services are still taking advantage of the piracy thing. They might be offering a good alternative because it's better than not making any money than completely losing everything with piracy. Mm-hmm. But let's face it, they're still not paying us enough. especially Amazon.
Yeah. Well, I think it's time for us to start winding this down, Michael. I think we got both more worked up.
We can rant.
I was actually going to go try to jump over the piracy section before you brought it up. I was like, maybe he won't bring it up and we don't have to get into this, because I knew this is what's going to happen. So sorry, audience, if you heard me rant in anything. I don't take back anything I said. Those are my true and honest feelings, but I'll work not to rant like that again.
yeah, because it's...
But I don't take it back. Make it be clear. This is not an apology for what I said. Nothing I said is wrong. I'll just try to be ranting like that.
We've realized before that when we get pissed on the podcast, it's not a good look for us.
Yeah. I think here it's justified, and I think I think it's fair. I think it's fair. And hey, it's a podcast. You want our raw, unfiltered opinions. If you wanted us to censor ourselves, you could go on any corporate, anything that's corporate that has to do with people discussing horror, and then you can get the censorship. That's not what we're here for. So this movie, Survival of the Film Freaks, is available on Shudder, like so many things in horror these days are. It's worth checking out. It's not like the most polished like documentary out there, but it is a good one. It's informative, and I think if you're into cult movies, watch it. And it's one of those ones where you could take notes on a bunch of titles that might have flew under your radar. If nothing else, you'll walk away from this movie with a list of things to check out that you might never have heard of.
And it has the spirit of the films that it analyzes. So
Definitely.
it has that campy kind of cult spirit to it.
Yep, it definitely does. So that's all we have for today's podcast. Check us out on Facebook.com, Facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show. Check us out on Instagram. Follow us on there. At what is it, Michael? Why am I having a brain fart? At Pickles Horror Show.
At Pickles Horror Show on Instagram and Facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show, or go to our Flow page, flow.page/Ghostman and Rivera.
And any information that you didn't catch, just look in our description. It's all there. You need to copy and paste, do whatever.
And we have lots of news coming up. I got yet another opportunity to work on another feature, so I'm going to be working on 2 feature films at the same time with Mr. James here. Mm-hmm. So we'll have plenty of updates, and we'll give you plenty of stories and everything about the making of those on the way.
Until next week, folks, happy horror.
Happy horror.